Dana White recently stated that 2025 was the best year in UFC history, emphasizing that the organization continued its upward momentum throughout the year. When asked whether there was a defining lesson learned by either himself or the UFC during 2025, White explained that nothing in particular stood out as a turning point or learning moment. Instead, he described the year as one marked by consistent growth and strong execution across the board. White acknowledged that a significant portion of the year was spent navigating discussions around the UFC's media future, including evaluating where the organization's next broadcast home would be following the Paramount deal. He noted that the UFC actively pitched its product to multiple networks, exploring opportunities and positioning the brand for long-term success. Despite the scale of those negotiations, White reiterated that 2025 did not feel like a year of correction or adjustment, but rather one of steady progress. According to White, the UFC simply continued building on what it already does well. He described the trajectory as up and up, reinforcing his belief that the organization is moving in the right direction without needing dramatic change. However, White also made it clear that past success carries no weight going forward. As the calendar turned to 2026, he emphasized that everything resets. No matter how strong the previous year was, it no longer matters once a new year begins. For White and the UFC, each year starts from scratch, with expectations to prove themselves again. He described 2026 as day one, stressing that the slate is wiped clean and the organization must once again earn its success through performance, growth, and execution. Alexander Volkanovski has firmly addressed the growing rumors suggesting that his upcoming fight against Diego Lopez could mark the end of his career. The former champion made it clear that he is unsure how the narrative of this being a retirement fight even began, emphasizing that it does not reflect his current mindset or plans. Volkanovski explained that the speculation may stem from comments he previously made about evaluating his future on a fight-by-fight basis. He acknowledged that, like any experienced fighter, he considers how much damage he takes and whether continuing would make sense if a bout were to go particularly badly. However, he stressed that this is simply a realistic way of thinking, not an indication that retirement is imminent. According to Volkanovski, unless something goes drastically wrong, he has no intention of walking away from the sport after this fight. His plan is to perform well, get his hand raised, and take as little damage as possible so he can return to action quickly. He even mentioned that the idea of facing another high-level opponent, potentially an undefeated fighter in the UFC, is appealing and continues to motivate him. While he acknowledged that there were brief conversations following his last fight about how many bouts he might have left, those discussions faded once he returned to training. Volkanovski said that as soon as he got back into camp, his competitive drive resurfaced and his focus shifted toward continuing his career rather than ending it. Ultimately, Volkanovski made it clear that retirement is not the plan. He remains committed to fighting, competing at the highest level, and pushing forward as long as his body and performance allow. The rumors, he emphasized, do not reflect his current intentions or mindset. Paddy Pimblett has issued a clear warning to Ilia Topuria, expressing strong confidence that his size and physicality would be decisive factors if the two were to meet inside the octagon. Pimblett pointed to recent footage from UFC 317 showing Topuria standing next to Alexandre Pantoja, noting that the two appeared nearly identical in size. According to Pimblett, that comparison highlights why a potential matchup at lightweight would heavily favor him. Pimblett stated that he has no doubts about how a fight with Topuria would unfold, saying he believes he would dominate him physically. He emphasized that Topuria is significantly smaller, both in height and overall frame, and argued that weight classes exist for a reason. Pimblett warned that if Topuria were to step up to 155 pounds to face him, the result would be brutal, predicting serious damage as a result of the size disparity. In addition to discussing Topuria, Pimblett also spoke at length about his upcoming interim title fight against Justin Gaethje. He revealed that he believes Max Holloway has already provided the blueprint for how to beat Gaethje in a stand-up battle. Despite Gaethje's reputation for knockout power, Pimblett made it clear that he is not afraid to keep the fight on the feet. While many fans expect Pimblett to rely heavily on his grappling and submission skills, he pushed back against that narrative, stating that his striking is consistently underestimated. He referenced his previous fight with Michael Chandler, noting that while Gaethje went to war with Chandler, he was able to control and outstrike him. Although Pimblett acknowledged that MMA math does not always translate directly, he expressed full confidence in his preparation. Pimblett concluded by saying that when fight night arrives, his game plan will be executed perfectly, predicting that he will finish Gaethje decisively within 3 rounds. Arman Tsarukyan has accused the UFC of deliberately protecting Paddy Pimblett, suggesting that the promotion is carefully managing Pimblett's matchmaking in order to preserve his star power. Speaking after his recent victory over Lance Palmer at RAF 5, Tsarukyan did not hold back in sharing his perspective on the situation. According to Tsarukyan, it is widely understood within the MMA community that the UFC sees Pimblett as a marketable figure they want to push toward championship status. He claimed that the organization is avoiding a potential matchup between the two because of the risk it poses to Pimblett's momentum. Tsarukyan stated that if he were matched up against Pimblett, the outcome would be clear and Pimblett would lose, which in turn would damage the promotion's investment in him. Tsarukyan also criticized Pimblett's current path toward a title opportunity, arguing that his interim title shot does not represent a legitimate claim to being the best in the division. He suggested that certain opponents are being selected because they present less of a challenge, describing Justin Gaethje as a favorable matchup for Pimblett. In Tsarukyan's view, this is precisely why Pimblett was granted an interim title opportunity rather than being tested against more dangerous contenders. He went on to state that fighters like Ilia Topuria pose a far greater threat and claimed that Pimblett would struggle in that matchup as well. Tsarukyan positioned himself as an even more difficult opponent, calling himself a nightmare matchup for Pimblett due to his skill set and experience. Tsarukyan concluded by saying that Pimblett is fully aware of the danger he presents and will do everything possible to avoid facing him. He asserted that Pimblett would attempt to sidestep a fight with him for as long as his career allows, reinforcing his belief that the UFC is intentionally steering Pimblett away from the toughest challenges in the division. Sean O'Malley has begun openly campaigning for a rematch against Petr Yan, stating that the fight should headline a major UFC event at the White House, provided he takes care of business against Song Yadong at UFC 324. O'Malley believes that a second matchup between himself and Yan represents the biggest fight the UFC could possibly make for that card. O'Malley expressed full confidence in his upcoming bout, stating that he expects to defeat Song and then immediately shift focus to Yan. In his view, no other matchup carries the same level of intrigue, history, or mainstream appeal. While acknowledging that divisional merit does not always align with promotional decisions, O'Malley admitted that Merab Dvalishvili may deserve a title shot based purely on performance. However, he emphasized that if the goal is to create the biggest possible fight, a Yan rematch stands above all others. He added that competing at a White House event would carry special meaning, particularly as an American fighter. O'Malley suggested that such a historic setting deserves a major name and a high-profile matchup, and he feels a responsibility to represent his country on that stage. According to him, few fighters fit that moment better than himself. O'Malley also shared his admiration for Petr Yan, calling him one of his favorite fighters to watch. He reflected on Yan's rise in the UFC, describing him as incredibly skilled, intimidating, and relentless inside the octagon. O'Malley praised Yan's recent performance, noting how technically sharp and violent it was, particularly highlighting his use of elbows and pressure throughout the fight. He described Yan's display as one of the most impressive performances he has seen, emphasizing the precision, toughness, and composure Yan showed from start to finish. Despite their rivalry, O'Malley made it clear that his respect for Yan's abilities remains high, which only adds to his belief that a rematch would be a massive and unforgettable event. Laura Sanko believes the UFC will continue moving in a direction that prioritizes excitement and finishes, even if it means cutting fighters who are technically successful but lack entertainment value. According to Sanko, the promotion's recent decisions suggest that action and violence will be increasingly rewarded, and fans should expect a more aggressive product moving into 2026. Her comments come in the wake of the UFC releasing Renan Fakino, a decision that surprised many observers given his undefeated 6-0 record inside the promotion. Despite his strong results on paper, there has been widespread speculation that the release was influenced more by his fighting style than his win-loss record. Sanko acknowledged this perception and suggested it reflects a broader shift in the UFC's priorities. In an interview with Mike Bone, Sanko explained that the current atmosphere within the organization strongly favors fighters who actively pursue finishes and engage in high-paced, violent exchanges. She noted that there is growing emphasis on rewarding fighters who bring excitement to the octagon, rather than those who rely on conservative or risk-averse strategies to win decisions. Sanko also pointed to the UFC's evolving broadcast landscape as a key factor driving this trend. With a new broadcast partner and increased accessibility for viewers, she believes the promotion feels pressure to showcase what mixed martial arts truly represents to a broader audience. Without a traditional paywall limiting viewership, the UFC is preparing to introduce the sport to new fans who may be watching for the first time. According to Sanko, this shift creates a clear message for fighters on the roster. Aggression, urgency, and a willingness to pursue finishes are becoming essential. As the UFC enters a new era of visibility and exposure, Sanko expects the organization to continue trimming fighters who fail to deliver excitement, reinforcing a product built around action, intensity, and decisive outcomes. Arman Tsarukyan has addressed recent speculation surrounding Justin Gaethje after photos surfaced online that appeared to show a possible staph infection on Gaethje's neck. While the images sparked concern and widespread discussion among fans, Tsarukyan made it clear that he is not overly worried about the situation and does not believe it will impact his own plans. Tsarukyan explained that injuries and infections are often exaggerated on social media, noting that the internet tends to jump to conclusions whenever photos like these circulate. He acknowledged that staph infections do occur in combat sports, but emphasized that teams and fighters rarely make such issues public unless absolutely necessary. Despite being present and ready, Tsarukyan confirmed that he will not serve as an official backup fighter for the bout between Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett, nor will he go through the process of weighing in. He referenced a previous experience in June where he agreed to act as a backup, made weight, and ultimately saw no opportunity come from it. According to Tsarukyan, that situation proved to be a drain on his energy with little reward. While he admitted that fighters are compensated for acting as backups, Tsarukyan downplayed the financial aspect, stating that money is not his priority at this stage of his career. He made it clear that his focus is firmly on earning a championship opportunity, rather than taking precautionary roles that do not advance him toward a title. Tsarukyan also revealed that when he previously agreed to serve as a backup, there were no guarantees made regarding future title contention. He said the UFC simply asked whether he was willing to step in if needed, and he agreed, believing it might help position him for the next opportunity. In hindsight, however, he feels the decision did not benefit him. Ultimately, Tsarukyan reiterated that his goal remains unchanged. He is not interested in symbolic roles or short-term payouts. His focus is on securing a fight that moves him closer to the belt, and he is no longer willing to expend energy on situations that do not clearly support that objective.